From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. Tonight, a tariff about-face spurs a stock rally. President Trump's announcement of an extended tariff deadline for the EU after talks with the European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen send the major benchmarks up 2% or more as consumer confidence rebounds after 5 consecutive months of decline. We'll discuss it all with the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Stephen Miran, up ahead.
Plus, a potential inflection point in Russia's war in Ukraine. Reports today President Trump is debating imposing sanctions on Vladimir Putin after Ukraine says Russia launched its biggest drone attack yet on the country, part of an escalating campaign after that 72-hour ceasefire just weeks ago. The name-calling now between Trump and Putin, those potential peace efforts, and a lot more when Evelyn Farkas of the McCain Institute joins us.
And the budget and tax bill is now in the Senate's hands, but is almost guaranteed to be altered and sent back to the House for a final vote, with Democrats set to offer no help with the majority's narrow margins. We'll speak with Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore on how her colleagues are prepared to act as the president's signature legislative achievement hangs in the balance. But we begin tonight with the news that buoyed markets. President Trump agreeing to give the European Union until July 9th, rather than June 1st, to negotiate a trade deal with the U.S. and avoid the implementation of a 50% tariff. Joining us now with the view on the news from the White House is Stephen Miran, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, though we find him at our world headquarters in New York this evening. Mr. Chairman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. When we consider this changing news on tariffs and the impact it has on sentiment in this economy, looking at the consumer confidence data we got today with a massive jump after a de-escalation in tariffs and tariff rates with China specifically, what relationship do you see here between the president's trade policy and the impact it is having on everyday Americans' consumption habits?
Thanks for having me, and it's great to see you again. Look, the consumer confidence data this morning were really great. There's no other way to put it. It was the biggest jump since March of 2021, right? So very substantial improvement in consumer confidence. However, I came on your network and other networks pointing out when consumer confidence was down last time that the correlation between it and hard economic data was not as strong as it had been in the past. And I think what we're seeing is that those confidence data overreacted to the financial market activity. And now that financial markets are back, the confidence data are back too. But the bottom line is that Americans know that President Trump is a profoundly pro-business and pro-growth president. His administration is profoundly pro-growth. And just like last time, President Trump created a great economic boom through his policies. And the same thing is in the works this time. And Americans know that, and they're starting to understand that.
Well, of course, markets are jumping here on the pullback over the tariff threat in part, and wanted to hear from the president who spoke to this over the weekend on where tariff negotiations stand with the EU. Stephen, let's listen.
You spoke to European Commission President von der Leyen. Did you discuss the 50% tariff?
She just called me, as you know, and she asked for an extension on the June 1st date. And she said she wants to get down to serious negotiation. We had a very nice call, and I agreed to move it. I agreed to do that, and that she said we will rapidly get together and see if we can work something out.
President wrote on Truth Social, I have just been informed that the EU has called to quickly establish meeting dates. Stephen, when did talks begin?
Look, President Trump is one of the best negotiators in history, and throughout his long career, he's forged hundreds of deals in commercial real estate, in residential real estate, in financial markets, in legislation, and yes, in international trade as well. And what he's demonstrated yet again is that he knows how to bring the sides together to talk. And just as his tariffs brought China to the negotiating table to forge the phase 1 trade deal in his first term, he's managed to bring the EU to the negotiating table as well. And so I'm delighted that Commission President von der Leyen called the president. I'm delighted that they had a great call, and we really look forward to the EU starting to get serious about these negotiations. We've been very clear with the EU for weeks now that they need to be very serious about putting a real solid proposal on the table to start these negotiations. And they need to start thinking about what non-tariff barriers they can take down to open their markets to American exports.
Just to be clear, though, do we have dates on the calendar yet?
I'm not a trade negotiator, and I don't know if there are dates in the calendar, but both sides are clearly very interested in talking and very interested in reaching a deal that would head off this type of activity. And if we don't reach a deal, then the president will follow through. But, I think that it's very important that the sides get together and start talking. And to do that, the EU really needs to get serious about putting non-tariff barriers on the table.
Well, when we consider the idea that maybe the tariff rate will be brought down from 50 to something lower, the administration has made it pretty clear that no one is going to be able to get lower than the 10% base rate that is applicable to everyone. What assumptions are you making about that impact on inflation and on growth in the near term, so long as that 10% rate remains in place?
Well, so first of all, I don't want to prejudge the outcome of these negotiations. And, I think that the president, as I said before, is famous for his negotiating ability. And I can't wait to see what comes out of these trade deals. But with respect to the 10% rates, look, a 10% rate is not huge enough to have any adverse consequences in the economy. It's not exactly the same thing as a 10% move in exchange rate, but things like that happen all the time. And, they have an effect on the economy, and then they move on and they pass. There's not going to be any material downside consequences. We'll take in tons of revenue as a result. And by the way, that tons of revenue, hundreds of billions of dollars every year, will significantly help alleviate deficit concerns, which a lot of people are talking about.
Reporting today about the U.S. steel situation. Stephen, I know that the president is heading there later on this week. Reports that the Nippon partnership, as the president put it, is in fact a takeover. Are we comfortable calling it that?
Look, I think that they've come to a deal which is amenable to both sides, and I think the president has said in his Truth Social post that he thinks that Nippon can be responsible in boosting jobs and boosting investment, and I think that's good enough for me.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to return to the point you were just making about the deficit and concerns being raised around that, especially as Congress is working its way through this one big, beautiful bill. I know that you don't put much stock in the Congressional Budget Office analysis of the deficit impact, but you can basically look at any independent analysis and see that almost all agree this will add to the deficit. Why are they wrong and this administration right about that?
So I think that folks are wrong. And by the way, it's not that I think poorly of the CBO. I think the CBO does fabulous work in its little corner. But the problem is that the CBO follows very specific rules which have limited generalizability to the rest of the economy. It's like looking at one little corner of a painting and not the entire painting. You've got to look at the entire painting. And if we look at that entire painting, we see that the tax incentives in this bill, the improvement in deregulation by taking down red tape across the economy so that companies can build, invest, and hire when they want to instead of begging for permission from the government, reopening foreign markets to American exports. All of these are enormously growth enhancing. And if we get growth to 3%, that creates $4 trillion of additional revenue every year, over 10 years, that's not included in the CBO score. Also not included in the CBO score, tariff revenue that I just spoke of a moment ago. That's an additional roughly $3 trillion over a decade. Also not included in the CBO score, supply side policies push out the supply side of the economy through better tax incentives, through less regulation. That brings down inflation. Bringing down inflation also brings down interest rates. Interest rates were the biggest expense last year, right? Bringing that down cuts that out of the deficit. These are hundreds of billions of dollars from each of these items every year that brings down the deficit that's not included in the CBO score.
Well, as you talk about deregulation specifically, how much is the Council of Economic Advisors assuming deregulation will add to GDP growth? What does that number look like?
Yeah, so our analysis of that is that it's going to add, somewhere between 40 and 90 basis points to GDP growth. And that's potential growth. That's supply-side economic growth. And I think this is an area that economists always underappreciate. And the reason is that it's fundamentally qualitative and not quantitative. It's pretty straightforward for economists to study tax rates. It's pretty straightforward for them to study interest rates. They're numbers. You can do really good quantitative analyses. But regulations are qualitative, and it's very difficult for economists to study that, and so they underappreciate it. But the work that we've done indicates they're very, very profoundly important. I mean, think about it. If you want to open a new job site or expand into a new line of business, you may have to wait 5-7 years begging permission from the government to do so, and that's delays to work. It increases the cost of doing business. It increases compliance costs. Those costs push through the entire system, through the entire supply chain. If you've got a 6-year delay for permits, it may mean that funding is not available also because no bank wants to lock up funding for that long. Oh, and then, by the way, at the end of the 6 years, maybe there were lawsuits, maybe there was an election, maybe you don't get your permit after all, right? And so this is incredibly powerful for holding back firms, from preventing them from investing in the economy, from doing business. And we want to get rid of those barriers so that any firm that wants to build, invest, hire can just do so.
You spoke with us last week, Mr. Chairman, about the importance of avoiding a 2011 Europe-style crisis. When you consider the debt ceiling as part of this reconciliation package, there are questions about when the X date is going to fall. I'm sure that you're asking them. How important will it be that this be handled within this reconciliation process as opposed to a separate standalone matter?
So I'm going to defer questions about the X date to my colleagues at Treasury. But, you know, look, it's really important that we get this bill over the line, because if we don't, it's going to be the biggest tax hike in American history, in world history. It's a $4 trillion tax hike. It'll plunge the economy very likely into a very steep recession. And we don't want that, right? So it's really critical that we get this over the line, and that include the debt limit.
Stephen Miran, thank you for being with us, as always, Chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. It's good to have you back on Bloomberg. Up ahead, the big step the administration just took, impacting student visas, going beyond its attempts to block Harvard. But up next, President Trump warning that Vladimir Putin is playing with fire, as he said in a Truth Social post. We'll discuss the possibility of new sanctions on Russia with Evelyn Farkas of the McCain Institute next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities.
President Trump this weekend blasting Vladimir Putin with words the Kremlin dismissed as an emotional reaction following what Ukraine says was one of the largest Russian drone attacks in months. President Trump ramping things up again on Truth Social today, warning Putin that he is, quote, playing with fire, while saying he protected Russia from, quote, really bad things, as top lawmakers call for sanctions on the country, with Republican Senator Chuck Grassley writing, it's time for sanctions strong enough so Putin knows game over. Joining us now for more here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, our Bloomberg National Security Team leader, Nick Wadhams, and Deputy Washington Bureau Chief Laura Davison. Welcome to you both. Nick, when he talks about playing with fire, what fire other than sanctions does the U.S. have to throw at Russia?
Well, I mean, it does have options. Obviously, sanctions is the big one, and I think that's what Trump would prefer if he actually has to do something, which I think he doesn't really want to do. But, you know, the other big issue, of course, is weapons. Trump has been very reluctant to provide more weaponry for Ukraine. He's shown no interest in signaling that Congress should approve a new supplemental to set aside more funding and weapons for Ukraine. And he could essentially uncork that and put substantially more pressure on Russia than he's already doing. But the big one would be sanctions.
I don't know what really bad things would have already happened. He's referring to Russia. But as we read, forget the tea leaves, the Truth Social posts here, right. This feels weird asking this question. Has Donald Trump lost Vladimir Putin?
It certainly,
or the other way around?
It certainly seems that things have gotten to this, dare I say, emotional and personal aspect of you have Trump calling Putin crazy, the Kremlin firing back that Trump is being emotional in his response here. You know, it's not unlike some of the negotiations we're seeing with the trade deals, where Trump ramps up the pressure, but then before there's actually a deal or actually progress, he backs off. We saw that over the weekend with EU. He threatened this new round of tariffs. Then a couple days later, once EU came to the table, he backed off. It's unclear if he's waiting for Putin to show some sign that he, might be willing to de-escalate the attacks or move towards a ceasefire or something. And this is what you have Republicans on the Hill, as well as supporters of Ukraine, very worried about, is that he will see, get a glimmer of hope from Putin, see something he likes, and then stop, sort of anticipating or amping up the pressure there.
Well, I wonder if this also could be seen as him setting the stage for the U.S. walking away from the table, because multiple administration officials have floated that they're not going to spend their time trying to get this deal forever. Laura, could he be trying to characterize Vladimir Putin as an irrational actor here so that he can basically say, look, I can only negotiate with a rational person?
That is certainly the case. There has been speculation for months that, as soon as it was clear that Trump was not going to get an easy victory in the Ukraine-Russia spat, that he could just simply walk away. What that means, and whether that means, sort of pulling away, any sort of U.S. support, whether that just means that he's not going to be, officially involved in sort of trying to broker some of these deals, he's pulling away Witkoff and some of his other close allies, is unclear. But, Trump is sort of famous for, having a project not go his way and then just throw up his hands and say he's done and that it's somebody else's fault.
I don't know if Donald Trump thought that freezing the lines in place would help to get this done on day one. But what has he learned since the campaign trail about Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think the big thing, and you're seeing in his comments there, is that he really believed that he could do something based on what he believes is his personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. They know each other. This is something actually that successive presidents have fallen into, the whole George W. Bush famous thing, like I looked into his eyes and saw his soul, where they believe they have a connection with him and can make a move here. I think what you're seeing is Trump's potentially recognizing the limits of that relationship and also recognizing the fact, as a lot of Trump's critics have been saying for a long time, Vladimir Putin does not want to end this war. He has no incentive to end the war. If the U.S. is not going to keep providing weapons to Ukraine, it is a slow, grinding, very costly war of attrition. But by degree, Russia is winning it. So he believes his leverage will only increase as the war goes on.
Great to have you both with us. Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams and Laura Davison with us live in Washington. We thank you for the insights. As we turn now to Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director at Arizona State University's McCain Institute, formerly the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia and Ukraine under the Obama administration. It's good to see you, Evelyn. Welcome back. If I can stick with that theme, as Nick was talking about, George W. Bush looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes, saw his soul. Of course, John McCain famously saw KGB. What does Donald Trump see in Vladimir Putin's eyes?
I don't know. I mean, clearly Donald Trump thought that Vladimir Putin was a guy who was willing to make a deal. Putin will make a deal, but only on his terms. And I think what we're going to find out, we're going to see our president realize that Putin doesn't want an end to this war. He does not want an end to this war, at least not an end that results in a Ukraine with its borders intact and no Russian influence over its future. That is just unacceptable to Vladimir Putin. That means Vladimir Putin will not compromise anytime soon without further pressure.
Would that further pressure be sanctions, Evelyn? Is that adequate to get Vladimir Putin to compromise?
Kayleigh, I think it's a really important part of all of this. The president, I think when he's threatening, bad things, probably he's thinking first and foremost about sanctions, only because that's what we've been following in the news, that Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham, has been actively working on a piece of legislation that he is ready to, in essence, move on as soon as President Trump says, OK, I'm ready to go. If the president will sign, the Senate will sign, and of course the House will have to go along again if President Trump is in favor of it. These sanctions, the way that Senator Graham lays them out, would be significant. They would hurt Russia. But it's not the only thing, as your earlier panel said. A military assistance to Ukraine, really ramping it up, could make a big difference as well.
We spoke on the early edition of Balance of Power today with Ben Jensen. He's director of the Futures Lab and senior fellow for the Defense and Security Department at CSIS. Evelyn, here's what he had to say about the impact of adding additional sanctions on Russia.
If we have a natural dampening on oil prices at the same time that we have a more concerted sanctions package, we can at least squeeze the ability of Vladimir Putin to wage war. Now, to be fair, that's still going to take time to actually impact his battlefield performance, given that he's got consistent support from both China and Iran and has found ways to kind of turn on the Russian economy into a war economy.
With our focus here on the battlefield, Evelyn, if we added those sanctions now, what kind of a window would Putin be dealing with before it actually started to hit home?
Yeah, I mean, I think the analyst that you just showed, is right that you wouldn't see an immediate impact. But I think within 6 months, you could see an impact. The Russian economy is, yes, a wartime economy, but it's a weak economy. I mean, they have women working in factories making bullets, according to sources that I have, in places like Kazan and Nizhny Novgorod. And, this isn't a sophisticated defense effort. They're mobilizing their citizenry, which means, of course, it will be hard for Putin to end the war because all those people will lose that income. But Russia doesn't have a lot. They are using up their foreign reserves and their economy's in trouble. And if the price of oil goes below $50, that will impact them. And if on top of that, you see their buyers turning away from them because of the tariffs that we will impose on Russia, that would make a difference. It would take, though, some time to manifest on the battlefield. The other problem Russia has is manpower. They don't want to do a call-up of their reserves. They don't want to call up more of their men from the major cities like St. Petersburg, Moscow, et cetera. They've been essentially avoiding that so far. So time is not on Russia's side. I think if we put more pressure on them now, it is probably our best opportunity to really force Putin to compromise.
If time isn't on Russia's side, what reason do you see for Russia to be burning through so much ammunition with these drone and missile strikes that we've seen ramping up against Ukraine, often targeting civilian targets rather than things that necessarily would advance their position from a territory perspective?
Because Russia is gambling that time is not on Ukraine's side. What they're trying to do with these barrages on, the citizens of Ukraine is essentially to kill the will of the Ukrainian people to fight for their sovereignty, for their identity, for everything they hold dear, which is, of course, unrealistic. But the Ukrainians are, of course, tired. The Ukrainians don't want to fight anymore. So the Russians want to make it as painful as possible. And they also have been trying to, telegraph to the Ukrainians through their media and through the social media and disinformation that, look, the United States is turning away from you. You might as well give up the fight. Of course, the Europeans are not turning away, and the United States is not turning away either. So the Ukrainians are not going to fall for what Putin's doing. And if anything, it just highlights the fact that Putin is, frankly, breaking international law, conducting human rights violations that we've all become kind of, numb to. But they are not hitting military targets. They're hitting civilians in their homes. Let's not forget that.
Much has been said, Evelyn, about this president, as in Donald Trump, making good use of the madman theory, a la Richard Nixon. Your unpredictable nature keeps other world leaders on their heels. He says now that Vladimir Putin has gone absolutely crazy. So who's the madman?
Well, I think this might be President Trump giving himself an explanation that he can also provide to those who support him and his policy towards Russia, or at least the policy that he had been following up to now, which was more lenient, to say, in essence, look, something happened to Putin. I need to change course now. So that is fine with me, because at the end of the day, if that means that President Trump is going to take a harder line against the Kremlin, then I think it's in the national interest of the United States and the world, frankly.
Evelyn, we just have a minute left here, but do you see Vladimir Putin as having gone crazy, or is this just a continuation of the policies we have seen emanating from this Kremlin for well over a decade now?
Well, Kayleigh, as Senator McCain said, Vladimir Putin is a cold-blooded KGB guy. He's known all along what he wants. He's not insane. He wants a new Russia, a Russia that controls Ukraine and all of the former Soviet states, as well as influence over Eastern Europe and as far as he can get into the rest of Europe. He also wants a United States that's weak and can't stop him from achieving those goals.
All right, Evelyn Farkas, always great to have you on the program, Executive Director of the McCain Institute, here with us on Balance of Power. And we still have more coming up ahead. News regarding the president's media company and why it's trying to raise several $1 billion. A hint, it involves crypto. But up next, now that Republican tax bill is in the hands of the Senate, how are Democrats positioning their next move? We'll discuss that with Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee that looks at tax policy, up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I want the Senate and the senators to change, to make the changes they want, and we'll go back to the House and we'll see if we can get them. In some cases, those changes maybe are something I'd agree with, to be honest. It happens. But we've had a very good response from the Senate, and I don't know how Democrats can't vote for it.
President Trump over the weekend in his continued push to get his one big, beautiful tax and spending bill through the Senate after it narrowly passed the House last week. House Speaker Mike Johnson, in contrast to the president, is encouraging senators to make as few modifications to the package as possible. Joining us now for the latest here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio is Bloomberg's Mike Dorning, who helps lead our Capitol Influence team here in Washington. So, Mike, we know the president had to help the speaker in getting this over the finish line in the House the first time. Yep. Is he now making it harder for them to get it over the finish line a second necessary time?
Well, I think actually not, honestly. A good president, any president, you don't want to get too bogged down in the details. And I think this president, like any president with some experience, is not sweating every little detail in this tax package. Trump is going to want this tax package through as long as it's broadly what he wants. And if they make some changes one way or the other on assault deduction, on some other things, if they add in a carried interest thing, if the House would go along with that, he's going to be okay with it. So there's no point in setting bright lines that you don't really want to enforce.
Earlier this year, a lot of Republican members, and we saw many of them on camera, had some difficult town hall meetings in which they were berated by voters who at that time were very upset about the DOGE and the way DOGE was communicating cuts, the way people were being laid off here, never mind programs leading to research programs and so forth being cut. Now, in many cases, they're upset about Medicaid cuts. Mm-hmm. Mike, what are lawmakers hearing back home now?
Well, I think one of the things that Josh Hawley has articulated, and it's a very real observation, is a lot of those red voters, a lot of Republican-leaning voters, are people who benefit from Medicaid. And this is a party, particularly under President Trump, that's taking a more populist messaging stance and relies on these voters. So if these things start to hurt them, then you're taking a risk. And Hawley's making a pragmatic political argument that you don't really want to do something that potentially hurts the voters that elected you.
Couldn't the same arguably be said for the red states that have benefited from some of the funding in the Inflation Reduction Act and the subsidies that are going to be rolled back now on an escalated timeline because of the compromises given to conservatives in the House? Yeah,
and absolutely. And you find in the Senate there is some pushback on that. I mean, although ideologically, a lot of those people don't like the clean energy tax credits. If you've got a big plant in South Carolina, North Carolina, other Tennessee, that's reliant on those subsidies, those tax breaks, then you take them away and the plant shuts down, your constituents aren't going to like that. And these are some of them very large, very visible plants. And just because rural areas tend to have lower cost labor and lower cost land, that's where they tend to build these plants.
Great to have you with us, Mike, as always. Bloomberg's Mike Dorning, we thank you for the insights. For more on the Democratic response to the tax bill, someone who was just knee-deep in all of this in the House, we turn to Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. She's a member of the House Ways and Means Committee with a direct focus on taxes. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. If Speaker Johnson gets what he's asking for, which is few or no changes to this bill, what will the changes to Medicaid and the SNAP program specifically mean for your district?
Well, thank you for having me. You know, from your lips to God's ears that the Senate are going to change provisions in this bill, but I don't know in which direction they'll do it. Some senators, like my own senator, Ron Johnson, wants even deeper cuts. But he probably would go for deeper cuts, I assume, in the tax cuts for the wealthy as well, because he's concerned about the debt. Simply, there just aren't enough poor people, I think, to cut SNAP or Medicaid to the bone any further to generate enough quote-unquote savings for these tax cuts. So what they've done is put the tax cuts on the credit card. Now, that's why they have the request to raise the debt ceiling. by another $4 billion. So it'll be very interesting, since I think the Senate is split on, one, a group of senators that may not want the Medicaid cuts to be as deep, and two, those who don't want the deficits to be that deep. So it'll be really a course in sausage making to see how they come up with something that will satisfy the House as well.
Well, when we consider that deficit, Congresswoman, obviously one way to bring it down is to cut the spending side, which they're trying to do. The other would be to raise revenue. But wouldn't a tax hike on everyday Americans, especially those who can least afford the cost of living as it stands right now, potentially be just as damaging?
Well, I mean, they would, there are choices. It's not as if any single portion of this bill is tethered to another portion of the bill. For example, they're making permanent a higher tax rate of what it moves down from 39% to 37%. That was an option that they chose for an upper income tax bracket. Also, the 199A program is a big giveaway. It's not a program that is geared toward helping those small businesses that we all love and we all cheer on. But we have beneficiaries that have gotten $115 million breaks through this provision. And the 199A provision, we have examined it, 2022 records, and I'm telling you, 84% of the people who got these hundreds of billions of dollars worth of tax breaks didn't create a single job, not one.
Congresswoman, the CBO says this will cost $2.4 trillion over 10 years. It will add that much money to the national debt. You mentioned your Senator, Ron Johnson, says that's unacceptable. And I wonder how you feel about the deficit spending and the addition to the debt as well, and whether it's worth actually voting no if it means a tax hike for millions of Americans.
Well, we're talking about a tax hike for millions of Americans. There was a choice that could have been made. If they wanted to make permanent those things that they left temporary for individuals, they could have done that for $1.8 trillion. They did not have, this bill did not have to swell to give billionaires tax breaks as well. Those are choices that they were made. So it's not, to say, let's not raise taxes for everyday Americans. Everyday Americans are not the top 0.1%, that gets a huge, just bonanza windfall in this tax bill. They talk about raising taxes for everyone. If you're making under $50,000 a year, maybe you'll get an income tax return of $265. And when you realize that you're going to lose Medicaid benefits, you're going to lose access to SNAP, all kinds of other assistance, that $265 doesn't go very far.
Congresswoman, we heard from your leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, last week when this bill passed that would go down as the day that Republicans lost control of the majority. As you look ahead to 2026, knowing that some of these cuts we're talking about, including the stricter work requirements for Medicaid, will go into effect now at the end of 2026, if everything stands as is, do you see this as having that benefit for your party, that they have a greater chance of regaining control?
Well, I'll tell you, unfortunately, I do think that it means we have a better chance to do it. But, Democrats have saved the day so many times to stop bad stuff from happening to our constituents. We're trying desperately now to elucidate the horrible things that are in this bill and to educate the public. And I think that we are making some inroads. The fact that it passed so narrowly in the House means that we have made some traction with regard to convincing people that these devastating cuts will not be tolerated by people. And I think that if we increase the misery index with passing this bill, that they will pay dearly at the polls for this. And to say that Democrats will benefit from it, it's not that we won't have to work for it, but this is not where we want to be. We would do anything to be able to convince our colleagues to pull back from the brink and not take $300, billion out of SNAP, $880 billion out of Medicaid, and certainly not to end the energy credits that will really, just to stay on topic, that will disadvantage us internationally.
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman, we lost a giant from the Democratic Party over the weekend, the longtime congressman from Harlem, Charlie Rangel, who, of course, was the first African-American to chair your Ways and Means Committee. I wonder what the Lion of Lenox Avenue would have to say about this bill today.
He would say, Gwen, they're just making it up as they go. They're just making it all up as they go. They don't know what they're doing.
All right, we appreciate it, Congresswoman. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us, Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. Now, other news that we're following this evening, President Trump's media company, which operates his True Social platform, is planning to raise $2.5 billion in capital to invest in Bitcoin. The deal includes plans to sell $1.5 billion in stock and another $1 billion in convertible bonds to roughly 50 investors. Initially, the news sparked a pre-market rally, but shares of DJT closed down on the day by more than 10%.
The announcement coming as Bitcoin reaches an all-time high last week. The U.S. Senate advancing bipartisan crypto regulation legislation. The president and his family's crypto ventures have also raised bipartisan ethics concerns, as we've discussed. The world's largest crypto conference is underway right now in Las Vegas, where keynote speakers include Vice President J.D. Vance and the president's eldest sons, Eric and Don Jr. Coming up, we'll have the latest escalation in the ongoing battle between the Trump administration and Harvard, with the university now set to lose all of its federal contracts. We'll have details when we assemble our political panel next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Whether they be student or if you're a tourist who needs a visa or whoever you are, we're going to be looking at you. It is a goal, as stated by the President and Secretary Rubio, to make sure that people who are here and understand what the law is, that they don't have any criminal intent, that they are going to be contributors to the experience here, however short or long their stay is.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce earlier today on changes to the U.S. visa vetting process. As we've been reporting, Secretary of State Marco Rubio ordering U.S. embassies to stop scheduling interviews for student visas as the Trump administration considers stricter vetting of applicants' social media profiles.
The directive is part of the administration's effort to restrict foreign students' entry to American schools over concerns about national security and anti-Semitism, and comes after the administration attempted to block Harvard from enrolling international students. Harvard is suing the government over that foreign student ban, has won a temporary court order blocking it, with a court hearing scheduled this week to extend that restraining order. But
the Trump administration is taking another step in escalating its feud with Harvard today, moving to cancel all remaining federal contracts with the university worth an estimated $100 million as part of its battle against the oldest and richest U.S. school.
Federal Acquisition Service Commissioner Josh Grunbaum is directing federal agencies to review their contracts, terminate those that they deem not critical, and transition to other vendors if necessary, according to a letter seen by Bloomberg. We'll continue to bring you more details on the story as it develops, but we want to bring you more analysis here first on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, and turn to this evening's political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, also, of course, with Iona University. And given you spend so much of your time in academia, Jeannie, I'll come to you on this one first. As we see the administration taking step after step, trying to make Harvard's position more and more uncomfortable, how long can the university continue to withstand the pressure?
You know, they are trying to bring the university to its knees. This has been a long-term goal of the Trump administration, of the far right, and they are taking the steps. You know, the reality is, though, you just look at this latest fight about the government funding and these grants and contracts. As Alan Garber, the president, said today, these are not gifts given to Harvard. This is money that is contracted to the university for a service provided for the American public. If the government decides it is not getting the bang for its buck that it wanted to, that is fine. Remove the contract or give it to somebody else. But that's not at all what is going on here. What is going on here is this is a short-term, politically motivated effort to chill talk about liberal issues at the university. And that is the problem here. So the government is going to have a fight on its hands because the university is going to fight back. And the court case that's scheduled now is scheduled on Thursday, ironically, the same day Harvard has its commencement for this year.
Well, Rick, it's a heck of a way to treat a hedge fund, as Scott Bessent calls it. When you step back and look at this, though, do you agree with Jeannie that this is bluster, or could these be truly detrimental to Harvard's business?
Oh, sure. I think it could be very detrimental to Harvard's business. When I was in the White House as director of the Domestic Policy Council, the Harvard contract for the administration ran through me.
So you know a little bit about this.
And so, you know, we did strategic planning with cabinet secretaries. We did crisis management with sub-cabinet members. I mean, and these were ongoing programs that had existed before the Reagan administration had taken office, and we looked at it and said critically, are we getting bang for our buck, as Jeannie said, and we thought we were. Because a lot of these folks out of the private sector go into the public sector, and it's kind of a sink or swim mentality. Like, gee, we hope you do a good job with the public's money. And we just thought it was better to actually train them a little bit. And so that's what Harvard does. And a lot of that $100 million goes toward those kinds of public initiatives. And so if the administration decides they don't want to do it, obviously, it's well within their rights to pull the contracts and to give them to somebody else or just not do it. There is a sink or swim strategy that you can employ here. Good luck, boys. But at the end of the day, I think Jeannie's correct, which is this is a concerted effort to get Harvard to bend the knee. And it's a financial, it is a ideological, it is a legal strategy that crosses all kinds of lines. And the biggest concern I think you would have to have if you're in the Trump administration is, what if it doesn't work? What if they show that they can actually survive without the federal government and prosper, and all of a sudden, you know, other universities will look at that model and say, okay, maybe I ought to do what Harvard's doing.
Well, surviving without money from the federal government would be one thing when you have a $53 billion endowment. Surviving without international students, which comprise more than a quarter of Harvard's student body, would be another. We'll see how a court ultimately decides on that this week, Rick. But knowing that that effort seems now to be going well beyond Harvard, as the State Department is pausing or encouraging a pause of interviews for candidates for student visas, what does that signal to you?
Yeah, it's pretty iterative, right? Oh, well, we're going to, sort of disqualify Harvard from having students from overseas. And, oh, by the way, gee, maybe we can set new standards for all these students in the country. Hundreds of thousands, millions of students come from all parts of the world to benefit from our education system and contribute to our economy. And so I have absolutely no doubt that the motivation of the administration is we want ideologically consistent people in our country, right? This is a administration that is picking favorites, right? And if you are outside their ideological footprint, maybe we just deny you a student visa. So even if you're accepted to a U.S. college and university, doesn't mean you can actually get in to matriculate.
Well, it wasn't the only thing we were talking about. It was quite a weekend for rhetoric for the Trump administration, not just Harvard, not just the war in Ukraine, but also the speeches that he delivered to the West Point commencement, complete with a MAGA hat, and also later on Monday, Memorial Day, when he spoke to the gathering at Arlington to mark a solemn occasion. Donald Trump spoke about drag shows and trophy wives as he addressed the cadets at West Point. Here's a taste.
And he sold his company, and he had nothing to do. He ended up getting a divorce, found a new wife. Could you say a trophy wife? I guess we can say a trophy wife. It didn't work out too well, but that doesn't work out too well. I must tell you, a lot of trophy wives doesn't work out.
We should note, Jeannie, the First Lady was not present at Arlington when the president went to lay the wreath yesterday. I'm not sure exactly the point of the story he was telling about a real estate developer there, but the approach that he took, wearing the hat, telling jokes, talking about, in some cases, some off-color stuff, means what for the future of these commencement addresses? Or is this just Trump being Trump?
Well, I have to say, I spent a lot of time at graduations over the years. And did he talk for 90 minutes? Is that true? Because God bless the students, the parents, the faculty who sat there. Graduations are long enough. He should take a page from Chuck Schumer, who sometimes comes on stage and says, I'm going to give you a final gift, and rips up his speech because graduations are long. So there is that. But yeah, of course, he's politicizing and talking about the golden age of the military. This is the first class of the golden age because they've been liberated from DEI and diversity initiatives. But guess what? When the U.S. Supreme Court made its decision a few years ago on affirmative action, it specifically exempted the military academies because it's a national interest that there is diversity, equity, and inclusion there. Somebody forgot to tell Donald Trump about that in his 90-minute rambling speech.
Rick, did you watch the whole 90 minutes? What impression were you left with?
I'm not going to tell whether I made the entire process, but I was recently in West Point doing a talk, and it was really, really inspiring to see the commitment of the young men and women who intend to serve their country in uniform. And I just think it's a missed opportunity for them. It's the Trump show, right? We've all gotten sort of immune to this is what happens every single day. And whether it's hat or hatless, it's the same message. And you never know what you're going to get. The wander occurs. And it did in this case. But we're used to having very inspirational speeches at these graduations. It's the unique benefit of a academy grad is to have the president come at some point in the 4 years that you attend to give your commencement. And it's just disappointing, I'm sure, to the cadets to not get a real inspirational speech. I mean, it's not to say that everything he said was inappropriate, but why have this as the story of your graduation? So thank you for serving, West Point cadets. Congratulations on your graduation. We appreciate your service.
That's a nice message, I think, that we can all embrace from Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Many thanks to our two panelists. Great to have everyone back together following the Memorial Day weekend. Quick programming note, by the way, NVIDIA set to release its earnings. Yeah, that's tomorrow after the bell. We're going to have full coverage, including a live interview with the CEO, Jensen Huang, during a special edition of Bloomberg Technology. Kaylee, that's tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're setting our clocks.
Indeed, and I would imagine that the policies emanating from here in Washington are going to factor into that conversation as we consider the export curbs that NVIDIA has to deal with, the deals for NVIDIA chips and others that the president was able to strike with countries in the Middle East. I would imagine all of that is going to come up, in addition to, of course, the earnings, which, as we well know, given the market cap of this company and its weighting within the major benchmarks, could have the power to take literally the entire stock market with it one way or another. Well, that's
true. This is why we're going to be watching this very closely. But yeah, the guidance based on what just came from this administration on selling chips to China is something that we'll be watching closely here on Bloomberg.
As the markets continue, of course, to watch closely all the policy on trade and tariffs. Remembering we did get a rally today after that pullback on the EU. We'll see what's in store for tomorrow. We'll see you back here then on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.